Going Nowhere. Episode 1. Yearbook. No one knows when Rose Frey disappeared. One moment, she was stepping into a forest green Packard clipper on her way to leave Nowhere. The next, she was found wandering across the cobblestone bridge built above Sugar Creek in the late 1800s. A model town citizen, Frey was a housewife, often described by friends and family as being kind, genuine, and a regular attendee of Sunday Mass, where she often brought pecan swirls. However, tragedy had struck the Frey family only 6 months earlier. Rose's husband, Richard Frey, passed away from pneumonia after being caught in the rain during a walk along the outskirts of town. They had never been able to have children. Richard had no family in town, and Rose's parents succumbed to a tuberculosis outbreak in the 30s, which left Rose completely and utterly alone. So, it is true that she intended to leave Nowhere. However, Frey insisted that she had no memory of the 3 days she was missing. She describes that period of time as a blank space, like the moments before you fall asleep, in which you do not know where your rest had ended and sleep began. Additionally, she had no memory of the car that 4 eyewitnesses saw pick her up from her home in East Nowhere. Indeed, looking over the vehicle registration and title information of the decade, it appears that not a single person in Nowhere ever purchased a forest green Packard clipper. Upon her return, rumors swirled around why Rose Frey wanted to leave. Perhaps she was in debt, some said, running away from her husband's creditors. Some mentioned that she had been receiving death threats, and even though the poor dame didn't want to leave her beloved hometown, it was the only way she could be safe. The truly cruel said that she was off to elope with a man she had been having an affair with before Richard died, only to be left at the altar. Because underneath her sweet-as-apple-pie demeanor, something had to be wrong. Somehow, it was too difficult for any of them to grasp the simple concept that the girl felt alone. Only a few friends tied her to Nowhere, a place that was now marked with the shadow of death for her, in more ways than one. It's difficult to make arrangements to leave Nowhere. For whatever reason, the town was founded in the middle of Indiana wilderness. On one side of us, the Hoosier National Forest, with its twisting trees and hiking paths that seemed to lead only to dead ends and impassable bodies of water. On the other side, cornfields stretching to the horizons, where the farmers of Nowhere make their living. And cutting through those golden fields, a single road, not paved until 1963, is our way out. Ultimately, Rose Frey did not have a happy ending after her mysterious abduction. On June 10th, 1945, she was found face down in Sugar Creek and was pronounced dead due to drowning. Little investigation was made into the possible connection to her disappearance earlier in the year, and her death was ruled a suicide. The isolation that the town of Nowhere experiences creates a sense of community. I know the stereotype is, oh, it's a small town, everyone knows everyone, and while I'd love to say that wasn't true, you go to school with all the same people and you get real sick of them, and then, oh look, they're in your Psych 101 class your first year of college. You can't escape the fact that any information in this town uttered to another living being soon becomes public knowledge. So, When someone in that community is missing, it's natural to assume that someone else will take notice. Except sometimes that doesn't happen. In the case of Rose Frey, even with the eyes of the town watching, she was able to escape for those 3 days, without a trace. Sometimes they just vanish into the blue, endless sky above the cornfields. Our story this week is a disappearance so unique that not one person in this town actually knows who disappeared, including me. In addressing fact before rumor, Rose Frey was not the first missing persons report in Nowhere's history. There are the ones that are publicized by the Nowhere Tribunal as being the case of the decade, and some defamed for being hoaxes. Then there are some that go entirely unnoticed. Blank spaces in photographs where there should have been a person. Pages in a book with nothing printed on them, despite being well read. And imagine my surprise when I cleaned out my old things in my dad's house and stumbled upon one such blank space in my middle school yearbook. No school photo, no adjacent name. Right in the middle of the page. Searching for an explanation, it came to my memory as quickly as it left, that in 8th grade, a classmate of mine ceased to exist. Obviously, this isn't grounds to project my fallible memory on the entire town. So, I reached out to an old friend of mine, Maura James, who was also in that class. Her response back was,
The more I think about it, the farther away it gets. But yeah, it was right before student holiday they were there, and when we came back, they were just gone. In English, Miss Giles, God, I hated her. Nobody said anything about it, and when I try to remember them, I can't really pinpoint any physical detail. It's like somebody took a photo of the class, then just smudged them out of it. Anyway, my memory's starting to get a bit foggy, but I think there was Zeke's sibling. I don't know. I remember a lot of conversation about him in that class. I'm sorry. I hope that helped.
what Maura describes, the photo analogy, is pretty similar to my experience as well. It's like the absence of memory, but for a very specific part of it. As for the missing person being Zeke's sibling, they are referring to Ezekiel McGuire. My attempt to interview Ezekiel went as expected. He's an alumni of the Brentwood Area Community College, my school, and I happened to see him at a coffee shop near campus. I wasn't bothering him. We were both in line, and I explained this project, what it meant, and asked him if he could tell me anything as a key witness. His response was a disgusted sigh before telling me that it was none of my business and to stop being a nosy kid. Just, God, what kind of cartoon villain do you have to be being a grown man mad at a 19-year-old girl? I tried to smooth it over, explaining that I was a radio station intern, doing a favor for the station, and assisting the Nowhere Historical Society in preserving the culture and stories of the town. He scoffed. I took my coffee and left. As for my memories, most of them fit the pieces of the timeline Maura gives. One day, there was someone sitting next to me in my English class, mocking the way I read Charles Dickens aloud. The next... Before I finish giving my account of the story, I should probably preface it by saying that, a lot of adults when I was younger told me I had an old soul as a kid, which I'm pretty sure was just signs of early mental health issues brought on by my parents' divorce, but anyway, I I just thought it made me super cool, but it really wasn't, and this is a really roundabout way of saying that it was around this time that I had begun to realize that people will say a lot of things they normally wouldn't when they think no one else can hear. So, I got very, very good at listening for just the right things. The day before they vanished, we had all come back from lunch, flocking into the classroom like noisy, squabbling geese. They were bragging to one of their friends about their brother, who I assume is Ezekiel, and the fact that he supposedly found an entrance to the tunnels beneath Nowhere. Such tunnels are legendary to Brentwood students. It's a tradition to try and find the tunnels while on campus, and often housemates dare each other to break some law or trespass somewhere on a hunch that their cousin's mother's friend's ex-boyfriend had. Obviously, the college discourages this, to the point that it's in the orientation booklets they give us. The tunnels are real, of course. The Nowhere Historical Society confirmed their existence using records taken from the Underground Railroad. Shortly after the Great Fire, any entrance to them was blocked off, and it was assumed that over the past 2 centuries, the tunnels themselves had collapsed. You can surely try to find them. You can hike through piles of mud and cobwebs and filth and beg people to let you into their basements and ancient cellars that have been converted into a giant cooler for their 2008 Pinot Grigio. And after an entire gap year of searching and searching with nothing but some soiled clothes and a reputation amongst your neighbors, you still won't find the entrance, and no private business built before 1900 will even take your calls. Which is why it was highly, highly unlikely that Ezekiel had ever come across the entrance to the tunnels of Nowhere. But I digress. The only reason the detail is relevant is because it caught my attention, and I had a mental flag knowing that this was a distinct conversation they had on that day, which meant that they did exist at some point. However, the next day I walked into my English class and was promptly greeted by an empty, gray plastic chair. I don't think I'd ever usually think of it as ominous, but my eyes kept drifting over as a nagging began in the back of my brain. To my knowledge at the time, no one had ever sat in that chair the entire year. I tried to keep my eyes focused on the desk in front of me, away from the pulling gravity that chair demanded. Then, my teacher called roll, stumbling on a name in the middle of the list. No one in the class had that name. Actually, I can't say that with any certainty. My brain simply wouldn't let me hear what it was. Instead, I just heard silence. Silence scares people. I think we're so used to using either our own internal monologue or external dialogue as a distraction that we just can't stand any absence of it. In silence, all you can hear is the pounding of your blood as it pumps through your body. My ears roared with the thumping of my own heartbeat. The assignment we had been given did nothing to hold my attention as my mind wandered to that empty chair. Every time I looked at it, pictured it, tried to access any part of my memory, I was greeted with that blank silence. Eventually, my headache got so bad that I asked to be excused to the nurse. Lying on the cot, in the dark, with my eyes closed, only made it worse. Panic had begun to set in, as the scope of whatever was ripped from the memories I had made of 8th grade became powerfully apparent. I tried, as I do now, to recall anything with clarity as to who she was. She. Yes. She was not from nowhere. Growing up in a small town, things like that stick with you. Her name was... It started with a J, like a Jackie, or Jacqueline, or Jocelyn. My apologies, listeners. It says here that I've lost, about an hour between when I first hit record and, when I came to. I believe I've covered what I could of the mysterious disappearance of my classmate. However, I also apologize because I'm not actually sure what all I discussed. Certainly this isn't the first time this has happened. One of my, associates, Ellie Novak, who is a junior member of the Nowhere Historical Society, was kind enough to pull old obituaries and letters, etc. for me. Despite being from all kinds of people, following different walks of life spread across 2 centuries of town history, they all had something cut out of them, like a jealous lover taking scissors to a previously cherished photograph. People who just vanished from time. Maura mentioned that they were Ezekiel's sibling. Does he know what happened? Is that why he was acting so dodgy? To his parents? I mean, what's worse? Remembering as I do that there's something in your memory missing? Knowing that you watched them take their first steps, say their first words, and remembering how deeply you loved them, but having this negative space that never allows you to know who they were. Or is it worse not to know they existed at all? I suppose, in the traditional sense, ignorance is bliss. To circle back to the topic of isolation, take care in checking up with your friends, family, and neighbors. Try to remember what good times you had with them, and pay very careful attention to what isn't there. You'd want them to do the same for you. After all, you never know when you may find yourself completely and utterly alone, with your face no longer tangible in their memories. Stay curious, Nowhere. Going Nowhere is a weekly mystery podcast produced by the Nowhere radio station. Make sure to subscribe to catch the next episode. Rate and review us on iTunes or leave us a like. Your support genuinely helps. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at nowhere_pod. Thank you. Have a wonderful day.